Greetings, cartoon connoisseurs, and welcome to the Animation Conversation, where we explore the art form from pencils to pixels. And now, here are your hosts, Rusty Shackleford and F.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Animation Conversation. I'm here with F again. How are you doing, F?
What's up, party people? It's your old pal F.
There we go. So today we got a real cool episode for you guys. Anybody that's been on F's Twitter recently has seen F talking about a pitch that he was asked to come up with something for Disney in back in 2003. So it was the Jungle Book. They asked you to turn it into some type of wacky type comedy, and you knocked that one out of the park, so to speak.
So here's what happened, and I might be getting the years mixed up, and I apologize that this entire show is just going to be me telling a story. But
no, this is what we want. Yeah, we want this is super cool insider stuff that you can't get anywhere else other than the Animation Conversation.
Yeah, this was at a time in my career when both Disney and Warner Brothers, and to an extent Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, were they would occasionally have me in to consult on stuff that were upcoming shows that were either in trouble or they didn't know what direction to take it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And which I enjoyed a lot. Like I loved being a consultant on stuff. One of the shows I did that early on for was a Disney show called The Replacements. And I can't remember if this was before or after Jake Long, American Dragon. But what I do know is it was, it was after being the supervising director of Fairly Odd Parents. So this was at a time in my career where my mojo was pretty strong. Like people wanted to know what John Fountain thought about things. So, and I'd worked with Disney now on a couple of occasions, and there were a handful of people in the Disney upper offices who were huge John Fountain fans, and then there were others who were huge not John Fountain fans.
Mm-hmm.
The little cabal of people who were huge John Fountain fans were just perpetually looking for an excuse to have me do something with the studio, because everyone was saying I was going to be the next Butch Hartman. So one of the executives who I particularly got along with was given the assignment of doing this series of things that they were calling the Legacy Project. And what that was they were going to take a whole bunch of their, properties and fit them as television series.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to bring in different creators to get their take on those things. I did this once for Warner Brothers too, for Thundercats, but that'll be a whole other show.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that'll have to be a whole other show, because Thundercats is one of my favorites.
I go into Disney, and this executive sitting across from me, and he's like, John, we're doing this thing called the Legacy Project, where we're taking shows and we're having creators, retrofit them for television. And I'm looking around his wall, and all of the possibilities are on his wall. And I'm seeing things like Goofy and Tron and the Rocketeer and, Donald Duck and just all of these great properties that I looked at, and I just started salivating. I'm like, oh my gosh, any one of these would be amazing. I was especially eyeballing Tron, because I was like, oh my gosh, I'd love to get my hands on Tron.
Yeah.
Because this was at a time where I was dying to prove to people that I could do an action show. But I'm looking around, and I see the name Jungle Book on the wall, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, anything but Jungle Book, anything but Jungle Book, anything but Jungle Book. Now, let me preface this for everyone who's getting upset with me right now. I like the movie Jungle Book. It's never been my favorite of the Disney movies, but I appreciate its place in the lexicon of Disney greats. It's a great movie, but it's nothing inside my wheelhouse. It's not high comedy. It's not high action. It's not that kind of in your face thing. So I'm sitting there going, oh, anything but Jungle Book, anything but Jungle Book, anything but Jungle Book. And the next words out of his mouth were, John, we'd like you to do a take on Jungle Book. And of course. And then the next words out of his mouth, I absolutely couldn't believe, because he was like, we want you to take Jungle Book and we want you to make it a wacky comedy like Ren and Stimpy. And I was thinking to myself, Jungle Book is a lot of things. It is heartwarming, it's poignant, it's entertaining, it's deep, but it is not funny.
It's not funny. No.
There's very little that's funny about
The only thing
Jungle
that's funny in it at all to me, the original Jungle Book, is probably Baloo and Louie. Those are the only two that I find funny at all. That's the only comedic relief. And then the three crows that sound like the Beatles. Those are the only three things about the Jungle Book that are funny to me.
But even those aren't like that's not.
No,
wacky
that's not. That's
funny,
not
you know,
wacky. No, that's not wacky at all. No.
And so they're like, we want your take on Jungle Books. I'm just like, oh boy. And so I go home. I actually reread the book, or I read the book. I had never read it before. I watched the movie. One of the reasons they were doing it was because they had either released or they were about to release the Jungle Book 2 straight to video movie. And so I watched that, and I'm like, okay, Jungle Book, what can I do with this? And I actually went through a few different iterations. I'm like, maybe I can convince them to make this into more of an action show where Mowgli is sort of the guardian of the jungle and yada yada yada, and he's an almost Tarzan like character. And I played around with that. I played around with some other sort of vague ideas, and I'm just like, oh, how do I make this funny? They're not funny. And I'm looking around my studio, and I look over to my bookshelf, and I've got a big stack of Calvin and Hobbes collections.
Okay.
And it hits me. I'm like, oh my gosh, Mowgli and Baloo were Calvin and Hobbes before Calvin and Hobbes were. So it's not even really stealing.
Yeah.
And from there on out, it was smooth sailing, because I was like, I'm going to do a Calvin and Hobbes version.
And I imagine at that point, if you have a stack of Calvin and Hobbes behind you, you have a lot of reference material inside of your head that you could go from off of this. Yeah.
Well, and make no mistake. I mean, obviously, I love Calvin and Hobbes, and I consider Bill Watterson to be one of the geniuses of our age. And so suddenly, this thing that I was dreading, I was now like on fire for. I was like, this is going to be awesome. And so, one of the first things I did,
the Jungle Jams,
I put together. Yeah, I didn't want it to be called Jungle Book, because I didn't want people to. I wanted people to relate to it who hadn't even necessarily seen any of the movies. I wanted you to be able to, watch it just as I wanted you to be able to come in cold and just watch it as a comedy.
Yeah.
And so that was my take on it. Was Mowgli was this kid, and he had all the history from the first two movies, but he was raised in the jungle, and so he was always sort of fighting between his jungle life versus his now life trying to incorporate himself into a world with other humans, and that's often what is going on with Calvin and Hobbes, because Hobbes sort of represents Calvin's fantasy world and everything they can do with their imagination, whereas Calvin is stuck in the real world. So I did what everybody does. I started sketching up the characters. And
I really like Shere Khan. I really like this.
Yeah.
It's such like the model you use for Shere Khan and the one you use for Bagheera. I really like their faces and stuff like that. The long drawn out like cat faces. Yeah.
So the next step was, and now I told this to the executive who hired me, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is great. I love this idea." He's like, "But you're going to have a hard time selling this to the higher ups." And I'm like, "Well, I've got a perfect idea how to sell this to the higher ups. I'm going to do a bunch of comic strips, single panel comic strips, showing how this can be funny." And so, and I very intentionally and very sort of lovingly tried to do it in a combination of my own style. And
sorry to interject, but that stuff is absolutely beautiful. That is some really good drawings. I really like that.
So I did like I can't remember, 10 or 11 or 12 single panel comics showing how this would be funny. And by the way, they're up on Twitter. So
Actually, yeah, they're on F's Twitter, and if you guys want to know my favorite single panel one that he posted, I really like the Baloo holding Mowgli with the honeybees over Shere Khan's head, as Shere Khan's trying to eat a gopher. I imagine is what that is, some
yeah,
small creature. But he's like dangling it over his head, getting ready to drop this hornet's nest, bee's nest on top of
right.
Shere Khan.
Right. So and that was it. I did a whole series of these comics, and if you go to my page on Twitter at Fountain Cartoon, I've posted them all there because it's not like I can do anything with
Mm-hmm.
them. And so I did a bunch of those, and by golly, it worked. The other executives saw this, and they were like, "Oh wow!" And these are very funny. And I said to them, "Well, if I can do those with a single panel comic, imagine what I can do, if we go to a series." And much to, even my surprise, they were like, "Yeah, okay, write up a treatment." So, I set to work, and this is the treatment. There's a bunch of my rough sketches in here. Any good treatment has a whole bunch of post-it notes stuck into
Yeah.
it. Lots of scribbles, lots of sketches. And I wrote an outline and I showed that to the executives. They approved it. They sent it back, and then I wrote an entire script called "Enter the Mowgli," um, where again it sort of set the stage for Mowgli's struggle between being a human and being, a kid that loves hanging out with his animal friends. And it turned out really, it was one of the few occasions where I've written an entire script from stem to stern, like all by
Yeah.
myself, because I've always been the first person to say, I'm one of the best writers that I know, but I am not a great script writer. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not a great screenwriter. And that is a whole other art form
Yeah, for
that I
sure.
readily admit I'm not great at. But I wrote this one all on my own, and I thought it turned out great. And I did some storyboard panels for it, and I just sort of showed, here's what it would look like. And I had really only two or three other people at Disney helping me out. I had someone doing color with me, and then there was the executive who would give me notes based on the stuff I turned in. But for the most part, there was no crew. It was just me. But each time I took another pass at this, I was like, this could really be something. Like this is coming together really well. And finally I finished it up. I was super duper proud of it. The executive who originally brought me on was possibly the only person who was more excited about it than I was. Because the thing, for those of you who are interested in the industry, one of the things that will happen is if you're someone who's got some mojo behind them, you'll find an executive who wants to attach themselves to you so that they can sort of be the one who discovered you. And we both thought this show was going to be huge, and we thought it was going to get a pickup, no problem. Because, again, everyone who has ever seen this Bible, and this is the reaction that it's getting on Twitter, looks at it and says, this is a no-brainer.
No
Why
brainer.
isn't
Looking
why
through your
isn't this
thread, yeah, looking through your thread, I'm not sure what argument anybody could posit that wouldn't have been a successful show, and that's coming from the audience that watches your shows, executives. As a member of your audience, I
yeah,
that would have been a show that I don't care what, like if they decide to redo this and I'm 50 and it comes out and it's John
yeah.
F's creation stuff like 100 years later, I would still watch it. It looks like something that is very very watchable.
I
I'm
have
kind of
never
mad that
I
it
have
didn't
never
exist. To be honest with you, it kind
yeah,
of pisses me off.
I this by the way, this was at a time when I had my own shows in development at a couple of different
Hmm.
studios, and yet I was very excited about this. Like,
Yeah.
I just thought this is where I'm going to be able to, like, really flex my wacky comedy muscles in ways that I hadn't before. Because yes, I'd been working on comedies, but they'd been comedies like The Fairly Odd Parents, which is not very squashy, stretchy, and
Yeah.
it's got that very stylized thing that I'm frankly not all that good at. So I was really excited about it. And by the way, I want to take a moment now that you mention it to obviously I can't go through the list of names, but I do want to say thank you so much to everyone on Twitter who has viewed this and liked it and shared it. I've gotten people saying things like, "Oh my gosh, why wasn't this part of my childhood?" And I would have watched the hell out of this. And what can we do to get this, brought back?
That's the bittersweet part about hearing all these insider stories is, we didn't know what we were missing out on. We didn't know all these things, but now that we're getting to dive into some of these conversations, we get to see all these beautiful things that you creators have created that don't get to see the light of day for whatever benign, it could be just something as simple as we don't want to do it, with no proper
Well,
explanation or anything,
yeah. Well, and look, I'll be honest, because I was friends with a lot of development executives at the time. I
Yeah.
got chummy with them, and as such, I got to sit in their offices and look through the stuff that they got pitched. And for every one really, really great idea that we all missed out on,
Mm-hmm.
there were 1,000 really terrible ones.
Oh, I can only
And
imagine. Yeah.
oh, I just, and the thing is, like, some of them you can tell come from a really sincere place, and you just, you want to give the show a hug just because you can tell the person was trying so hard. And but just no chance whatsoever of getting picked up at Disney or a major studio or something
Yeah.
like that. And again, for every 1,000 of those, you'd maybe have one that even had some potential.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I kept looking at this thing. This doesn't just have potential. This is literally a no-brainer. So we got very excited, and boy, did I learn that time around to never let yourself get too excited, because we did. And the material got passed around the the upper echelons, and they just flat out passed on it. Now, they didn't pass on it. Nobody said this isn't good enough. Nobody said we don't like what you did. I think everybody who sees it and everybody who saw it liked what they saw.
Mm-hmm.
But at every animation studio, and I'm sure at every movie studio, television studio, there are regimes and there are regime changes, and those people who are in charge of those regimes, they look at the network in a broad strokes way, and they say this is the direction that we're going to be going in. And at that time, what I was told was, you did a really great job, but this is not the direction that the studio is going in. And what can I tell you? It broke my heart. Now, again, my heartbreak healed pretty quickly, because not shortly thereafter I sold a different show, and now that wound up breaking my heart, because that was my own creation and didn't get picked up. But this again, this was one of those things that happens in the industry where I allowed myself to think, well, this is way too good to get passed on. But it went on to show that just because something is really, 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 really good doesn't mean it's going to be successful. There are a lot of shows that come and go, that everyone who sees them are undeniably like, oh yeah, this show is brilliant, this show is fantastic, or this movie is brilliant.
So let me ask
they
you
get
this.
rated-
This is a question that I
Yeah.
got to ask. And this is for like the animation industry as a whole, because I'm pretty sure they do this with like movies, but do they screen like these pilots and these things like that? So like, did this ever come to a point where you actually had a chunk of animation for somebody to screen?
No, it never got that far. It ordinarily, at the stage that I was in, all they wanted was a script, but I've always
got
been
you.
a big believer in over delivering.
Yeah.
So I also did some storyboards.
I feel like
And
over delivering in the animation industry, you have a higher chance of getting your show picked up if you give them more tangible things to look at, to see, not only what you could do, but just to see what it would, potentially look like fleshed out.
That's exactly it. You want to show the potential that it has.
Yeah.
And that was always my thing. If the more you can illustrate something, the greater your chances are of that person sort of getting what you're going for. And if they're just reading a script, it's just kind of this abstract thing that they have to picture in their minds. And a lot of the people who are in charge of giving the stamp of approval on this stuff are not very good at picturing things in their minds. And I again, I don't begrudge them for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to produce a whole number of illustrations. And that was the other thing. I was convinced we at least get to do a pilot, but no, we didn't get to do any animation. We didn't even get to do an animatic. And that's why I say I don't think it had anything to do with Disney. At no point did anyone at Disney, even the people who didn't like me at Disney, I don't think any of them said this isn't good.
It's just not a direction that they were going in a different direction, and that just didn't fit whatever the business model was at that current time. Yeah,
and I mean, look, if you look back, I can't even remember what direction they were going in 2003, but if that's when all this was going on. So if you look at the sort of what was going on in 2003, 4, and 5, then you can kind of see how something based on Jungle Book wasn't really, fitting in with what they were doing at the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's one of those things. I often bemoan the fact this, I think, is the only legacy project I've ever gotten to work on. I've never gotten to work on like a Bugs Bunny show. I've never gotten to do anything with Mickey Mouse or Snoopy, or any like existing legacy characters. I've always been on stuff that's new.
Well, if you ever want to do anything wacky with Mickey Mouse, his IP runs out pretty soon, I believe. I think it's like in the next year or two. Disney's scratching really, right? Their legal teams are going nuts right now to figure out how they can protect it still. But
right now, see what I want people to take away from this though is, and I tried to evoke this on Twitter, and I hope to bang this point home as much as I can. Is it's easy to hear this story and go, oh my gosh, that's so sad, and oh my gosh, poor F, and oh what a tragedy for all of us that we didn't get to see this show, and that really is the remaining tragedy, is that I wish I could have brought you this show because I think I could have entertained you with it. But don't feel bad for me, because it was this show that taught me how much I love a challenge. Because this went from being, oh, please, anything but Jungle Book, to this is one of the best things I've ever written. This is one of the best things I've ever, gotten my hands on. And ever since then, I have always, when dealing with executives and when dealing with clients and when dealing with anybody, I almost look for the challenge. And if something isn't challenging enough, I almost get bored, because now I have come to realize that a lot of times it's when you're working against what's comfortable that you come up with your very best stuff.
Yeah.
And I've come across a lot of animation students and young animators and stuff like that. Particularly when I was teaching at Cal Arts, I would challenge them in some way. For this very reason, they'll be like, well, I don't like doing that type of stuff. And I'm like, that's exactly why you should do it.
That's exactly, you gotta go outside of your comfort zone too. And that's just like a whole wide, broad spectrum of things. You've got to go outside of your comfort zone to get anywhere or do anything in life, honestly, to get, especially if you're a creator or an entrepreneur or somebody who's got one of those creative minds. You have to pull the Band-Aid off and do things that make you feel wholly uncomfortable to be able to get anywhere. Like me doing podcasting, when I first started doing it, I really wasn't that comfortable sitting and talking for an hour in front of a camera kind of thing, because I don't mind sitting and talking for an hour. I have no issue with talking, period, but just doing it and then putting it out for the world to see and all that kind of stuff, it does take a lot. It takes a certain kind of person to be able to rip that Band-Aid off and just dive into stuff. But you got to do it if you want to be good at anything.
And moreover, I get especially on Twitter, I get other young artists and stuff asking me all the time, how do you deal with writer's block, or how do you deal with artist block? How do you deal with it when you're blocked? And my answer is, I do something challenging. Do something that is actively, probably not going to be very much fun. That is almost always the cure, is to come up with a way to challenge yourself in a way that you've never been challenged before.
No, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned it. You're an example of that too. I mean, my goodness, I feel like, a lot of people sit around going, oh, it would be neat to do that, but I don't know how. And what if it's a failure? And what if nobody likes it? And what if you're just doing it for yourself, who cares?
Absolutely, and that's what all this is for me, I could care less if anybody really, I want people to watch our show, but if nobody watched it, just the conversations that I'm having and the people I get to talk to, and some of the stuff that I'm getting exposed to in this, like your jungle jams that you're sharing and stuff like that, if I would have never have reached out to you, I've never got this far, and that's a big thing too. What a lot of people are scared of, they're scared to ask people who they revere or they put on this pedestal. They're afraid to ask them, "Hey, will you talk to me?" or "Hey, will you have a conversation with me?" Whereas I will email Japan at 4 a.m. Trying to get guests and stuff. Hopefully, we can get a guest out of that. Honestly, shout out to it's Pokemon Concierge is the show that's coming out. And it's all stop motion animation, and that's what I liked about it the most, and the fact that it's being done by a Japanese studio as well. It was just, I don't know, because I know that Japanese studios, they kind of like our last guest Elliot said, Japanese studios don't really follow the traditional Western pattern of animation, and so that's I'm kind of interested in that too. So hopefully we get a conversation out of that. I got a quick question for you. So I've been and some of the people I've seen that like Garbage Boy, I've done a little bit more seeing, and now there's some people that are kind of poo-pooing on it. So what do you have to say to naysayers about Garbage Boy and Trash Can? Do you have anything for the naysayers? No, I don't either. Honestly, they're missing out on good stuff. I think I think once it's released, they'll change their tune. It's not out yet, so they can't really.
I can't be made to care.
Yeah, no, you're good. Yeah.
You're either gonna like the show or you're not, and if you don't like the show, then
it's not for you.
Not the show for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've talked about this a million times. I could name you right now, 3 shows that absolutely everybody not just likes, not just loves, but reveres. Like, and I can't stand them. So for me to be upset for someone that they don't like something I've worked on, whether it's Garbage Boy and Trash Can, or whether it's Fairly Odd Parents, or for me to begrudge anybody who doesn't like something that I do, I would then be putting myself in the position to defend myself for not liking the things that I don't like, and I don't feel like that's necessary.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, not everything is for everybody, and that's not how it's going to be. Now, there's a difference between saying I don't like something and saying that thing isn't good. You will hear me say I don't like something, but I can very easily tell you, but it has quality. Like, this was made with care, and this was made with, you can tell that people put a lot of effort into it. We were talking earlier about the Sing movies. I don't like the Sing movies, but I can tell that they got some top talent working on that, and other people love them.
Yeah, for sure.
So you're not going to hear me say the Sing movies are bad. You're going to hear me say I don't like them. Like, they're not for me. And that's perfectly legitimate. So to anyone who, looks at anything I've worked on and says, well, what you've done is bad, then to me, that's just trolling. And that's just like, all right, you're a sad, angry, bitter individual, and this is how you make yourself feel a little bit better about how miserable you are by looking at something that somebody worked really hard on and then shit talking it. And again, the only reason I ever resent stuff like that is because I now pity you.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to sit around feling pity for you. So
for sure, I feel that.
That's kind of where that comes and goes.
Yeah.
And look, again, I don't even, going back to Jungle Jams, I don't begrudge. And this is why I sort of had a reputation in the industry for being one of the few creators who wasn't angry all the time. When stuff of mine got passed on, I didn't sit there and stamp my feet and be like, "Oh, the world is against me." It's like, no. And by the way, they didn't pass on it necessarily because they don't like you, or even because they don't like their show. They've got a bigger agenda in front of them, and it may not include you. that's kind of life. So that too is one of the other little lessons that I took away from this, that I hope, other people will get from this animation conversation,
There you go.
is that, um, experiencing rejection or experiencing disappointment, including in something that you have created and that you put a little bit of yourself into, that exists for a reason. Feeling those feelings of rejection and disappointment, those are emotions, and those are feelings that you can put into your work, and then you've taken something that you thought was negative and you've turned it into a positive.
Yeah, as a human being, there's no point in walking around pissed off all the time. Absolutely, I totally agree with that sentiment. There's really no reason to, because if you do, then you're missing out on life. If you're just pissed all the time, you miss out on things because you're too worried about what you're mad about to enjoy what's in front of you, type stuff. Yeah.
Well, and again, without disappointment, happiness has no meaning.
Yeah, it would just be. It would be even. That you got to have you got to have ebbs and flows. Like a tide.
Yeah,
you got to have that.
Everything would just be flatlined. So again, would end. And somebody recently asked on my Twitter, have you ever pitched a show that got passed on? And I was like, a show? No, I've pitched literally probably 36 shows that got passed on.
Yeah.
And it was a disappointment every time. But every time I walked away from it going, well, I have gained this much more experience at pitching and putting together a Bible.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you can't see right away where that experience is going to lead you, or how that experience is going to help you later on in life. So,
yeah,
again, I feel like we try and sell people a lot on this notion that you're supposed to be happy all the time, and that you're never supposed to experience disappointment.
Yeah. And you set yourself up for failure when you don't, it's the expectations. Once you set all these crazy expectations for life, you set yourself up for that failure.
Right. Again, life is, and I don't want to get preachy or anything here, but life is, multifaceted and multicolored and multi everything. And you have to embrace all of it, and especially as artists, if you're an artist, or if you're someone who does something creative, my goodness, art is almost always created through pain. I've got this theory that I, this is the hill I'm going to die upon until somebody tells me otherwise. All comedy comes from pain.
And comedy that's not funny, like comedians who aren't funny are generally comedians who haven't experienced those type of pains in life. I'll use Jeff Foxworthy example because it's just one that I could think of that a lot of people like. So Jeff Foxworthy is wholly funny to a lot of people, but he's not funny to me because I don't feel pain in his comedy. He is not. He didn't grow up in a trailer park. He didn't grow up in this like redneck environment that he talks about. He grew up a normal middle class life, and that's what I just don't find his humor that funny. And most of the comedians that I find the funniest are the ones who have been through a lot of trials and a lot of tribulations in life, because that's what comedy is. It's a poke at everyday life, and if you haven't experienced everyday life in an everyday way, because the majority of people are going through pain and trials and tribulations in life. Not saying Jeff Foxworthy hasn't, but the majority of people are going through deep trials and tribulations. The 99% of the population is going through that. So it's way more relatable, and that's in any form of media is pain, in that art.
And again, we're also talking about a sliding scale of pain. We're talking about lesser and greater degrees of pain. You can be, when you talk about pain as a means for comedy, you can talk about slipping on a banana peel, one of the oldest jokes there is.
Yeah.
You can talk about, why did the chicken cross the road to get to the other side? Even that, the reason that's funny is because you are made to feel embarrassed for not getting the answer right in the first place, because it's so incredibly obvious. So it can be a small amount of pain, or it can be getting shot out of a cannon and having your head go up an elephant's butt. It can be a small amount of pain, or it can be a large amount of pain. But characters who are happy all the time and characters who are, positive and upbeat and all that all the time are very rarely funny. Or if they're funny, they're a little funny, and I would question, are they funny or are they validated?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And people do like to be validated. And by the way, if that's what you're into, that's fantastic. If it makes you happy, that's great. But, for me, myself, I've always liked the big laughs. you know, anytime you can take a stupid joke and make it even stupider, I'm all for it.
Yeah, that's good.
That's,
Yeah.
that's why I say when you think about my little Jungle Jams tale, try to think of it the way I think of it, as a stepping stone to a much greater, larger realization about myself. And if there are people saying now you should pitch it again, and I have no time or energy for that.
Yeah.
But I can say to everyone that I got out of it stuff that was way more valuable than any paycheck or any credit on a series. I got out of it real, true self-awareness, and you can't put a price on that.
No, you can't at all. Well, that was a great story. No, I really liked hearing about that. That's some good insider stuff. Well, there you go. That was Jungle Jams, everybody, with F here. No, that's cool stuff. I hope we get some more cool stories like that about some other stuff that you've worked on and
I've got
brought
a
to
million of
fruition.
them, and
Yeah, I can't wait. Yeah.
I'll be sure to follow me on Twitter at Fountain Cartoon, and be sure to like, share, and subscribe my YouTube channel, Fountain's Pen Cartoons, where we are currently creating brand new cartoons with nobody other than me, sort of dealing out the comedy. It's me and my fantastic crew of now 130 people,
Wow.
creating new
That's
free
insane.
original content for you guys. And this one, no one's going to be able to say to me, no, we're not interested in that. This is just straight from the creators to you, the public. So please get on YouTube, like, share, and subscribe. And I will be telling more story. This is mostly what I'm on Twitter for, is to tell more stories like this. And I will always be sort of previewing what we're going to talk about on this show.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
follow me, follow Animation Conversation.
Yeah, follow all that stuff. We're now on Threads. I believe F is on Threads too now, correct?
I'm not on
Oh,
Threads,
he's not on
but I am
Threads.
I'm on Fountain's Pen Productions is on Blue Sky.
Okay, Blue Sky,
So you
Fountain
can
Friends
follow me there.
Productions. You can follow them on Blue Sky. We are on Threads. Animation Combo is on Threads. You can find us on Threads, Instagram, and Twitter now. I'll be continuing to post our weekly announcement whenever we get ready to air the shows. Wednesday, 6 p.m. That's going to be our time slot for the foreseeable future, and that you can always
Nice.
find us there on YouTube, and that's 6 p.m. Central for everybody that's not in the Central Time Zone. So that's been another conversation, another animation conversation with myself here and
This is your old pal F, Zigga Zigga, party people.
Ziggy Zigga.
And that brings us to the end of another incredible episode of Animation Conversation. We hope you enjoyed this animated adventure as much as we did. Remember, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to us on our social media channels or through good old-fashioned email. We value your input and want to make Animation Conversation a podcast that resonates with animation lovers like you. Our Instagram and Twitter are @AnimationConvo. Our YouTube is @AnimationConversation. Our email is theanimationconvo@gmail.com. Before we say our final goodbyes, we want to remind you to stay animated. Keep exploring, appreciating, and sharing the magic of animation with others. Let your imagination soar and let the world of animated wonders continue to inspire and captivate you. Thank you once again for joining us on this incredible journey. Until next time, this is Wubcake, signing off for Animation Conversation. Keep watching, keep dreaming, and keep the animation conversation alive.